Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. Carl Jung. You ever notice how strange it feels to simply sit? No phone, no music, no small talk, just your breath, your body, your thoughts. Picture this. You're in a cafe. The people around you are buried in their screens. TikTok scrolls, Instagram loops, nervous glances at dating apps. Their hands twitch when their phones buzz. But you just sit. No notifications, no need to be seen. You sip your coffee slowly, like it's the only thing that matters. And suddenly, you feel it. Eyes on you. Like your stillness is unnatural. Like your presence disturbs the rhythm of their distraction. Or imagine you're at a party, everyone's performing, laughing too loudly, name-dropping, checking who's watching. You're not rude, you smile, but you don't fake. You don't need to prove, and that unsettles them. You can feel it. You didn't say anything wrong. You simply weren't seeking approval. And that silence speaks louder than words. That's the moment you realize something terrifying. You're not lonely. You're just clear. And clarity, in a world built on confusion, is threatening. Because the person who can sit with themselves without needing to be entertained, admired, or accepted is the one who can't be controlled. You see what others avoid. You feel what others numb. You've stopped running from your mind, and now you're dangerous. Not because you harm, but because you see, and the world does not reward that. It pathologizes it. It calls it antisocial, distant, even arrogant. But what if the truth is far darker and far more freeing? What if the man who can be alone is the only one who's ever truly free? A man can be himself only so long as he is alone. Arthur Schopenhauer. Let's be honest, most people aren't afraid of being alone. They're afraid of being with themselves, without distraction, because in the silence, the mask slips. This is the lie society taught you, that solitude is a problem to be fixed, that being alone means something's wrong with you, that if no one is texting you back, you must be failing at life. So what do? You reach for your phone in every quiet moment. You scroll through lives that aren't yours, trying to forget the emptiness in your own. You chase conversations that go nowhere, addicted not to connection, but to the illusion of not being alone. And beneath that is fear. The fear that without the noise, there's nothing left. So you stay plugged in. Every ping, every like, every text becomes a pacifier for the ache. But here's the cost no one warns you about. The longer you run from solitude, the more foreign you become to yourself. You don't know what you actually believe, just what's trending. You don't know what you really want, just what gets attention. You're not living, you're reacting, and that's exactly what the system wants. A person addicted to feedback is easy to control. They buy what they're told to buy, think what they're told to think, feel valuable only when someone is watching. But solitude, real, undistracted solitude, that's dangerous. Because it's in solitude that you start hearing your real voice again. Think of Marcus Aurelius, ruler of the Roman Empire, yet he spent his nights alone, journaling in silence, not for applause, not for likes, just to remember who he was beneath the crown. Or think of David Bowie. In a world screaming for sameness, he locked himself away in Berlin, alone with his demons, creating art that no one understood until they couldn't forget it. These weren't lonely men. They were free men because they belonged to themselves. But most people today can't go 5 minutes without stimulation because silence demands presence, and presence threatens the entire identity they've built on approval. You want to know why your mind is always loud? Because you've been drowning in the voices of others for so long. You don't recognize your own anymore. But here's the secret. It's not the loneliness that hurts you. It's the avoidance of it. The greatest thing in the world is to know how to belong to oneself. Michel de Montaigne. You weren't born afraid of being alone. There was a time, long ago, when silence felt like safety. When you could sit in the grass, watching clouds drift, and feel completely whole. You didn't need attention. You didn't need performance. You were enough, simply by existing. So what happened? You were taught, slowly, quietly, that solitude meant failure. Maybe it began with the empty lunch tables in school, the sideways glances when you sat alone, the teachers who praised participation over introspection, or the way your parents, though well-meaning, grew anxious when you spent too much time in your room asking, "Why don't you go out more?" It wasn't the silence that hurt, it was the story society attached to it. Alone meant weird, alone meant unwanted, alone meant loser. And so, you internalized it. You learned to escape yourself before you even knew who you were. And what filled the silence? Noise, friends you didn't like, parties you didn't enjoy, scrolls that never ended. You built a life around other people's expectations because you were never taught how to build one from your own. This is no accident. A person comfortable in solitude is dangerous to a system built on dependence. That's why you were trained, from cartoons to classrooms, to believe that being alone meant you were losing. You were given idols, like the popular kid, surrounded by fans, but never shown the inner lives of those who walked alone on purpose. You didn't hear how Nikola Tesla spent most of his life in quiet isolation, dreaming the future into reality, or how Frida Kahlo, bedridden and alone for months, created worlds within herself through paint and poetry, or how J.D. Salinger vanished from fame, choosing solitude over applause, and wrote his most powerful works far from the spotlight. These weren't antisocial outcasts. They were people who had met themselves and never wanted to leave. But you were taught that being loved by others matters more than knowing yourself, and so you became a stranger in your own body, always performing, always reaching, never arriving. But here's the thing, this wasn't your weakness, it was your training. You weren't broken, you were conditioned. But now, the question becomes, what if that conditioning no longer serves you? What if what once protected you is now suffocating you? In order to be free, we must learn how to let go of what weighs us down, even if it once kept us alive. Clarissa Pinkola Estes. At first, it doesn't look like a revolution. It looks like forgetting to respond to a message and not caring, skipping a party, and feeling relief, not guilt. Sitting at a cafe with no phone, no agenda, no mask, and realizing you're not bored, you're home. That's when it starts. The old self begins to crack, not with drama, but with disinterest. You used to chase people just to avoid silence. Now you start ignoring texts that feel empty. You used to post for validation. Now your favorite moments go unshared, unseen, and somehow feel more real. It's not apathy, it's awakening. You walk through a crowd and feel invisible, but for the first time, it doesn't sting, it soothes. Because being unseen by the masses means being visible to yourself. And that's when the loneliness turns to power. But this reversal, it's not without cost. The people who once praised your presence now question your distance. They ask, "Are you okay?" But what they really mean is, "Why aren't you who you used to be?" The answer is, because I stopped needing to be. Look at Emily Dickinson, who wrote some of the most soul-piercing poetry ever created, all from a room she rarely left. Or James Baldwin, who fled to France not for fame, but to finally hear his own voice beyond the noise of American expectation. They didn't vanish, they arrived, into themselves, and now, so are you. But the world doesn't applaud this kind of becoming. It calls it retreat, isolation, selfishness, because a person who no longer performs cannot be predicted, and what cannot be predicted cannot be controlled. You've stopped asking if you're missing out. You've started asking what you were missing within. And slowly, the idea of belonging to everyone starts to feel hollow, compared to the richness of belonging to yourself. This is the crack in the armor, the break in the spell, the part where the old world starts to slip through your fingers. Not because you're losing it, but because it was never really yours. And what's left? Silence. stillness, space. The very things you once feared now feel like breath. Loneliness is the poverty of self. Solitude is the richness of self. May Sarton. Something has shifted, not loudly, not with fanfare, but in the quietest corner of your soul, something has changed. You wake up and feel no urge to grab your phone. No need to announce your existence. You just breathe. Not because everything is perfect, but because for the first time, you're not afraid to feel it. This is the raw terrain of solitude. It's not glamorous, it's not curated, it's real, and it's disorienting. You go for a walk without music. For the first time, you hear the birds, not your notifications. You sit on a park bench, watching leaves dance in the wind, and realize no one knows you're here, and yet you are, fully. At first, it feels like absence. Then, strangely, like arrival. You start to notice the subtle addiction you had to being seen, not out of vanity, but survival. The constant need to check if you still existed in other people's eyes. Now, without the mirror of others, your reflection changes. There is no applause here, no performance, just breath and being. This is what Marcus Aurelius practiced every night, not for glory, but to remember what was real beneath the emperor's robe. And this is what Nietzsche meant when he said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." You are starting to feel your why, not given by others, but born from your own silence. It's uncomfortable, of course it is. You'll feel an itch to call someone, to prove something, to post, and then you'll pause, because you'll sense it, the sacredness of not needing to be needed. You won't be lonely, you'll be available to yourself. And slowly, your nervous system starts to settle, not because you've been accepted, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself. You taste your coffee slower. You look at the world without filtering it through a lens. You no longer belong to the crowd. You belong to the moment. And in that stillness, something awakens. The world hasn't changed, but you have. And nothing feels more dangerous or more holy. The individual has always had to struggle not to be overwhelmed by the tribe. If you try it, you will often be lonely, but no price is too high to pay for the privilege of owning yourself. Friedrich Nietzsche. Now, the shift is no longer just inside you. It begins to show in how you move, choose, speak, or don't. You no longer laugh when something isn't funny. You no longer reply out of guilt. You no longer need someone else to witness your joy for it to be real. And that rewrites everything. You walk into a room and don't scan for approval. You leave your phone behind, not as a statement, but because you don't need it to anchor you anymore. You eat a meal without posting it. You create art without showing anyone. You think deeply without turning it into content. Not because you're hiding, but because you no longer crave to be seen to feel alive. You begin to live for real, not for reaction. Your time becomes sacred. You spend it with intention. A walk becomes prayer. A breath becomes meditation. A decision becomes a vow. You build rituals, not to impress, but to root. Like Marcus Aurelius, you begin each evening with reflection. Not journaling for likes, but an intimate confrontation. Where did I abandon myself today? What did I seek that I didn't need? What silence did I ignore? This isn't productivity, it's self-possession. You ask questions society hopes you never will. Who am I when no one is watching? What am I if I am not performing? What happens when validation loses its grip on my nervous system? And slowly, you build a different kind of muscle, invisible, steady, dangerous. People start to notice. Not your noise, but your stillness. Not your posts, but your peace. Because a person who no longer needs the world becomes magnetic to it. But here's the paradox. You don't care anymore. You're no longer climbing the social ladder. You've burned the ladder and built a home underground, in silence, in solitude, in soul. And the world will try to shame you for it. They'll say, "You've changed. You're distant. You've lost touch." But you haven't lost touch. You've finally made contact with yourself, and that contact rewires everything. You don't just look different, you see different, you choose different, and in a world of noise, you become a quiet revolution. You only are free when you realize you belong no place, you belong every place, no place at all. The price is high, the reward is great. Maya Angelou. And now, you return, not to who you were, but to the one who was buried beneath applause, notifications, and false belonging. There's no parade, no audience, no post to make it real. Just you, making your coffee slower, walking without earbuds, sitting by a window, not needing to tell anyone how beautiful the sky looks. This is what it means to come home. You've stopped orbiting other people's approval. You've stopped performing likability for strangers. You've stopped outsourcing your aliveness. You are no longer addicted to being seen. You are now addicted to seeing. You watch your mind like a landscape. You feel your breath as if it were sacred. You move through rooms without shrinking, without shouting, just being. You are not lonely. You are complete, not because others gave you value, but because you stopped giving them power. And slowly, the world changes around you. People feel your energy before your words. They sense the depth you've earned in silence, and some will misunderstand it. But the right ones, they'll feel it too. You've become the rarest kind of person in the modern world. Not someone who escapes loneliness, but someone who transforms it into gold. Like Henry David Thoreau, who left the noise to live by Walden Pond, not to isolate, but to remember what living actually meant. Like Carl Jung, who built his own tower by the lake and wrote in Solitude, not to disappear, but to hear the voice that gets drowned in noise. This is your return, not to society's expectations, but to the stillness you were told to fear. From here, you'll create differently, love differently. Move through life not as a product of the world, but as a presence within it. You are no longer reachable through algorithms. You are not clickable, not predictable, not programmable. You are sovereign, sacred, and finally, whole. Now take a breath and sit with that. And if this video met you where no one else could, subscribe, leave a comment that only you could write, and send this to the one person who's finally ready to come home to themselves, not to be seen, but to see. We need more free people. Let it begin with you.